I have a question, so why don't we have at it?
George?
Yes.
First of all, let me thank you.
Stand up and really project.
Great presentation and the energy and enthusiasm will rub off on us also. You referred to this report multiple times. Could you please make it clear what that report is?
Sure. You all met Carter, who used to be the commissioner of DEP, very well regarded in our industry, by the way. He's now at a firm called HDR, and I think it's been brought on by DEP and New Jersey Future. I'm not exactly sure how that worked. But they've done a report on this whole issue. It's got one of the best summaries of the issue and the history of what's going on, plus options and examples. And I usually don't get the chance to read these reports. In my job, I'm lucky if I read the front page, but since I sat on a train for 2.5 hours, I read the whole goddamn thing. And other than the fact I felt that DC Water should be in more of the examples of good work, but of course I would think that. But other than that, it's really well done. So.
Let me just clarify where people can find it.
Oh, okay.
This is the report I mentioned earlier today that is on our website as of yesterday. So and we actually have a few copies if you find Jane. There she is. We have a few copies printed out. But so New Jersey Future, not DEP, because they're the regulator. We were able to hire HDR and Hawkins together, along with the model RFP that is also on our website, and both of which are going to be presented next week at the PSC, at that meeting.
George, one other thing
sure.
before I sit down and really shut up. As a member, a very active member of the New Jersey Water Environment Association, we certainly appreciate the participation that you permit and that your board members permit at our Operations Challenge every year. We look forward to seeing your guys every year.
Thank you. I always say we call our employees, we've got 1,200 employees at DC Water and 6,000 contractors. So that's the size of the operation at DC Water, but that's why we matter. I was in a meeting with job folks, and they said, you guys create jobs, and you create jobs that are accessible to people. Who else can say that right now, where there's jobs being created for something that matters? But I think of our, not just DC Water employees, the people who work in this field are just such great public servants. And they have one attribute that so many employees in many other enterprises don't have, which is they know the value of their own work. Even if the rest of everybody else doesn't, we know why it matters to what we do and what a gift that is. Yes, sir.
I have some more practical questions.
Sure.
Yes, yes, first, you service Washington's very sanitary region, airflow, do they participate in any of these CSO activities? Do they pay?
Oh, gosh, what a sensitive subject. DC Water is a very unique authority. We're the only authority in the United States that has a service boundary that crosses not one, not two, but if you think of DC as a state, 3 state boundaries. So we provide what I call enriched water. It's not wastewater. It's valuable to us. We're turning it into power. So it's enriched water. But wastewater services for Montgomery County and Prince George's County in Maryland, regulated by Maryland DEP. Loudon, Fairfax, and Arlington, regulated by Virginia DEP, and Washington, D.C. So it is a multi-jurisdiction region of 750 square miles. The challenge is the combined sewer system is only in D.C. So it actually was one of the more dramatic meetings. Before I became general manager of DC Water, I was on the board because I ran the Department of Environment for the city, and on that position, I was on the board of DC Water. And we insisted that the suburbs pay a portion of the long-term control plan cost because of the capacity that they were using up in pipes that required the tunnels. And went through a very detailed analytical framework to figure out what that proportion should be. And the good news is that it's anything, because at first it was 0. But the bad news is it's 7.1% on average. So yes, the suburbs do pay a portion of the cost of a long-term control plan, which is 7.1%, but 92.9% is paid by DC ratepayers, because all of the combined sewer system is in DC, and that's a challenge. We pay for the long-term control. This is another, I didn't mention in my presentation, when you start doing these things, and this is my experience organizationally, when you start opening up innovative practices, it starts to become something that gains its own momentum and innovations start happening on a bunch of other fronts. On a financial basis, our entire Clean Rivers is what we call it. Long-term control plan doesn't mean anything to anybody. Clean Rivers, long-term control plan sounds to me like what they do to my teenage daughter when she's having trouble in school. The Clean Rivers Project, you know why you're doing it. So we renamed it the Clean Rivers Project, and it is exclusively paid for by an impervious area fee on everybody's bill. That's not volumetric. So it is decoupled from volumetric water use. It's based on how much impervious cover is on your lot, because that is how much flow is going to flow off of it into the pipes. And it is for the Clean Rivers Project. So that has been something that has allowed, plus in the last debt financing that we did, we went to the credit markets in July for $350 million of financing. We floated a century bond, first ever done at the municipal level. And that is because two engineering reports indicated that the useful life, minimum useful life of our tunnels is 100 years. And while some folks, and it's in most cases you don't want to pass costs on to the future when we should cover it ourselves, but when the design of a system is meant to benefit by design someone 80 years from now, then it makes sense for someone then to help pay the cost, rather than saddling just the sad group of us who happen to be alive now, solving a combined sewer problem that was designed in 1880 and will be solved with a system that will last well over, my view is that this combined system tunneling that we build is going to be in place in Washington, D.C. as long as Washington, D.C. is a city. It's going to be hundreds of years. That the more we can spread those costs out, again, it's a creative way to help reduce the burden on our ratepayers. That was something our finance office came up with, but it came up in the context of, let's be creative. Let's look at every option we possibly can. And that's an ethic that sort of goes along with this sort of thing. It's just let's open up the floodgates, pardon the pun, for whatever options are out there. But the short story is we get 7.1% from our suburbs. Sure.
I do have one more.
Sure.
You mentioned that you learned a lot of things starting doing a GI project. Somebody that starts from scratch, would you recommend that you also do demonstration projects first before we launch it on the sale from scratch? And that's the reason I ask, because New York City has done demonstrations, you have
Right.
City of Philadelphia,
My reaction on that is twofold. It is definitely true that today there's far more real-time knowledge, experience, even maintenance costs on green infrastructure that did not exist that many years ago. When I first got to DC, I was at the Department of Environment, a new agency that hadn't existed before. And the first project I got, I hadn't been there 2 weeks, and the Nationals ballpark was opening. And there was 19 parking lots opening. By the way, when you do an impervious area charge, all of a sudden you can send bills to all those folks that own parking lots but don't have a water sewer connection. Because at the moment, water utilities only send bills to someone who's got a volumetric connection. Parking lots are generating all this flow, and if they don't have a bathroom, you'd have no reason to bill them. Well, by doing an impervious area charge, we're getting every parking lot. There was 19 new parking lots coming in. And I insisted on stormwater management for all these parking lots right on the Anacostia. And the owners would come in and they had a balls and strikes thing, and they're always going, how many weeks, days, and hours to opening day, and I was going to stop baseball in Washington, D.C. because of stormwater. But the reason I tell you that story is that all these years later, they now have this little tractor, because they work. It's inclined to the bioswale. You have to dig out the bioswale, or else it fills up with silt and stops doing its job. Well, they have a little tractor, and they know where to maintain it, where to put it, how often they do it. So the kind of practical knowledge like that, which we did not know 5 to 10 years ago, we do know. The reason I like pilot projects is what we discovered, independent of performance, is what does it take in my city to do this? And how many agencies are involved? And who are the various folks that have to be players? And do we have to, one of the things we did not have in DC was design specifications. We want to do if we get this consent decree modification, we're going to invest $90 million in green infrastructure. The city has never invested in anything like that scale. Since it had never really happened, there weren't good design specifications of what happens when you try to put green infrastructure. How close can a sewer main or a water main be? What about a Pepco power vault? Then you start working through those practical details. And in my humble opinion, without knowing those, having now been through it, if you don't know those practical details, it doesn't matter how much we know about the green infrastructure if it's built, because that's not the question anymore. The question is, what does it take to actually build it? And when you do a pilot, you'll get your city organized behind who has to be at the table, what are the processes that are in place. Maybe we've got to streamline them. In our case, we didn't even have some of the specifications, so we got them. So I still think the pilot is very valuable because of the practical questions that you're going to need to answer. Even if you're confident of the performance numbers, performance is also going to be based on how quickly you can build it. And that's all going to depend on how your city does this as a practical matter, and that is very much city by city. Yes?
I'm Elaine Fish, I'm from New Jersey, Future Lake, Georgia.
I like.
First of all, a testimonial to George. I lived in D.C. and paid the water bills for our condo association. And I think if I can go back and look through those bills, I can tell you the month you started. But at the same time, all of a sudden my bill was intelligible. I understood what I was being charged for. I could log onto the website and get information when I needed it. So I will absolutely back up what you said, that that kind of communication about value is hugely important. We were not happy to pay that bill, but it made sense. So my question is, with all the work that you're doing, the tunneling and even the green infrastructure, have you had the opportunity, a lot of the things that have come up today are about partnerships with other organizations, with other city departments, you know, if you're going to dig up the street, you can do it. Have you had that opportunity, and do you have insights from that that you can share?
Yes, I would have two observations on that front. One is, again, the advantage you have in New Jersey, and I see other of my friends here, but what the challenge we've had in New Jersey and in DC is reopening a consent decree, is that there's a certain quadrant of the environmental community that was very suspicious that the reason we wanted to reopen the consent decree was for some wrong, that we were trying to delay things or avoid something. I don't think anybody thinks that anymore because they see the sheer size and scale of what we're doing. But most cities that I know of, ironically, I go to Pittsburgh, I go to Philadelphia, I go to Cleveland, I go to other cities, you have environmental and community groups that are in favor of it. But that's because it's before the plan has ever been written, and therefore they're part of it, and they can see what it is rather than I've got one and I'm trying to reopen it, and then there's suspicion as to why we fought so hard to get it in the first place, and now you want to change it. So, yeah, we worked very hard to work with organizations in DC. It is infinitely easier to do that ahead of time than afterwards. And it's well worth it. Because in Pittsburgh, for example, where I was one of the examples where the biggest advocates for the green outcome are community and environmental groups in the city. They have become by far the biggest advocates, and they're the ones who can talk best to other ratepayers, city council, whatever the enterprise is that's going to have to support the rate or taxes or however it's going to be funded. On the government side, there is no question that this requires a team effort. DC Water is fortunate in some respects. We are an independent instrumentality. We've got our own procurement authority, our own finance, HR. We raise our own revenues. That's why everybody always tries to get, whenever you raise money in a city, well, you probably know, people are always swirling around you, seeing if they can get some of it. But we're independent. That's good. But we're not a mayoral agency. So we've worked very hard to build relationships because this cannot happen. A tunnel, this is one of the ironies. For DC Water by itself, one of the advantages of a tunnel is we build it 10 stories underground. Once we get the few permits or easements we need for the drop shafts, we don't have to ask anybody. We're just drilling down there. No one has told us yet, no, we own that down there. When you do green infrastructure and all the community work, that absolutely requires integration with the city. Now, in New York, that's part of the way the city is set up. In our case, it has brought us closer. There had often been an antagonistic relationship between DC Water and some of the city agencies. We've had a much better relationship built because of this, and I think that's a very nice benefit that comes along with the territory. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Carrie. Come on.
I had a question about the monitoring and evaluation. So we've heard a couple examples of how you see specific outcomes from the demonstration projects. Do you have any sort of broader principles that can be applied to long-term monitoring that happens, whether that gets fed into your regular operations or if it has to be part of the long-term control plan? Just speak a little bit to how you continue to make the case for the value you've provided over the course of the project.
That's a great question. The question is about long-term monitoring and review, and to me, it's still the most interesting, somewhat unanswered question about green infrastructure. One of the advantages of tunnels, again, and I'm not trying to overstate tunnels, I don't also want to understate the benefit of tunnels. Some of these are like tunnels are evil and green is good. I don't tend to see the world that way. One of the advantages of tunnels is they're ours. We don't have to ask for as many permits to build them, but then they're ours to maintain, and there's no question about it. Everyone knows who's responsible and what's done. As soon as you do green infrastructure, you've got your your city transportation agency, your city public works agency, perhaps a private condo association. You have an easement that may be connected. And my experience when I was at Stony Brook is that with conservation easements in central Jersey, the problem was one or two owners later who came to the property after the easement had originally been issued and didn't have the same personal connection to it that the regional giver of the easement had, and often did not therefore maintain it. Not because they were bad people, they just didn't feel personally connected to it, and may not even have known it after the closing on the property. And we have not worked through all those issues at DC. I'm not sure, there are easements that exist. To us, we are ultimately on the hook for performance. So while we hope to be able to dedicate funding in a trust fund that we otherwise would, this was part of our cost, that will generate, like a foundation, will generate revenue going into a maintenance pool in perpetuity. Because that's the only way we can say, 20 years from now, the green infrastructure isn't maintained, guess who gets hit for that? We do. Because we're the ultimate holder of the water quality requirements. So we're thinking very seriously about, it may be money that we dedicate to public works, or DDOT or some other agency to do the work. We don't have to build a new skill set if someone else is good at this sort of street maintenance. We just know it has to happen. And it can't be subject to all the other ups and downs of a city budget for something that is mandated for a performance level. So that is when the $90 million has some funding in it. In my opinion, not quite enough yet. We haven't exactly figured out how we're going to. Our worry is not 5 years from now, 10 years from now, it's 30, 40, 50 years from now. I mean, our tunnel will be functioning, in our judgment, at minimum 100 years from now. So we want green infrastructure to have that kind of longevity. So we do spend a lot of time thinking about it. Maintenance we know how to do, how to guarantee it in the same way you'd guarantee maintenance of your own system. It's something that we still do not feel like we've mastered, and we're focusing a lot of attention on.
What happens to the water that goes into the tunnel? Does it get treated? Where does it get discharged? What happens?
Good question. Ultimately, we'll have 15 miles of tunnels. All of the flow in the tunnels are conveyed. Originally, the tunnels, I don't have the map up, but if you remember, it comes down the Anacostia, it's the Potomac, then goes on the Potomac down to Blue Plains. Originally, the tunnels were going to end at where the National Ballpark is, on Poplar Point. And we actually extended the tunnel all the way down, so all of that flow goes to Blue Plains. And the most complicated construction project that we've ever done, we're going to build a treatment plant on top of the shafts for the tunnel. Because at peak flow, we can't get 100% treatment at Blue Plains because it's another, we have a 392 million gallon plant, so it's giant. But we have 3 times that much at a peak. So there's going to be a clarification plant that gives very good treatment, but not full treatment, built on top, but all of it goes to Blue Plains. So it gets world-class, 3 milligrams, 4 milligrams by permit. We hope to be by 3 milligrams per liter for nitrogen and phosphorus performance.
One last question.
Thank you. I know there's some cultural issues with this that doesn't really fit in with the green infrastructure definition. But are you aware of any pilot projects or work that's done there on composting toilets?
Composting toilet. I mean, we remember, Ed, we worked with composting toilet out in the Kings River, and it never worked quite as well as we hoped. Not that I know of at the scale of what we're trying. I mean, composting toilets could help with a disconnect into the sewer system, and if there was enough of them, I guess you would drop your sort of daily flow. The quantities, when you're talking 3 billion gallons of flow in a year, are so great that that's not to say, however, that one of the things that is very clear in EPA guidance and in the report we keep talking about is that reducing excess flow in the infiltration leaks that are going into the sewer system in the first place, conservation on the drinking water side, because everything on the drinking water side will end up going into the sewer, will get you extra capacity in your existing pipe. That is a context, I imagine, of a composting toilet, of reducing what's going into the sewer for daily flow. So we do that, and that was how we were able to get that billion-gallon reduction. We did all the 9 minimum controls that allowed us to have less going into the sewer pipe, so there's more space left over, and to have less infiltrating in, and a whole variety of steps. I don't particularly know Ed might, because he's got, his firm does a lot of that kind of work at Clerico. Yeah, you can ask him after. I'm not aware at the sort of industrial scale that we would need it in DC. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, George, very much. That was amazing. Thank you. So we've come to the end of our workshop, but definitely not to the end of our involvement and work with you. There's a lot of work ahead, and lots of opportunities to, continue interaction with us. We're here to help you both in terms of technical guidance and outreach. We have teams that we'll be setting up. There'll be a website that will be launched shortly with a listserv that you can sign up for information. And in the coming week or so, we'll be sending out a survey asking you to fill it out about what kind of workshops and trainings you feel you would like the department to provide going forward. We'd like to sort of thank all of you for coming today, but especially we'd like to thank all of our presenters and moderators and all of the staff who work behind the scenes to make this happen. So on behalf of New Jersey DEP, EPA Region 2, New Jersey Future, and Rutgers University, thank you so much for all of you and all that you did in being here today.